Welcome to episode 2 of the Uncharted Territory podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation with Sam today. We've had some amazing feedback after our first episode and our pilot, and some really useful feedback as well to help us shape the direction of these conversations, which we'll talk about. But today's theme is about the financial reset and whether the financial reset has already begun. We're going to enter into an explorative conversation about several of the nuances about the financial reset. We'll be touching on the Silicon Valley bank collapse and other things that could point in the direction of an acceleration of the financial reset, whether this will bring in CBDCs. Nothing is off limits. Sam, let's get started. Where should we start?
Let's get into it. Well, there's so much going on, which I think, both our intuition and a bit of prescience is why we started having these discussions, because things are really ramping up. Mm-hmm. Everything I've been talking about in my, some people are aware I've been giving financial reset talks the last 2 years, and we're starting to see what I've been talking about play out, in real time. So it's been super interesting. I was saying to a few friends of mine last month, I'm really curious to see what kicks off in March. And that wasn't purely just thinking, March is the time, but interestingly, a lot of stuff's happened in this last week, and we've entered this Ides of March period. And again, I'm not going to go super esoteric, but it's always worth remembering that a lot of these things do have esoteric and kind of astrological timings. And it was interesting that really March 11th, where we really kicked off with the Silicon Valley bank collapse, 11.3, that's your 33 in code there for people who are aware about the numerology. So again, we knew there's rumblings on the surface. And in a sense, we know the financial reset has been happening, already happened at some level, and going to continue to happen. But we're really seeing it come into the mainstream. And that's my argument. I always say it's slightly, it is organic, but it's also being manipulated, because since 2008, Dan, what we talked about, that really was the warm up, and they've been plastering it, and plugging gaps since then, kind of, trying to hold off the inevitable. Here we are, where it's going to ramp up. And I know that, the powers that be can really decide to pull certain plugs at certain times that suit their agenda. So I think that's what we're witnessing at the moment with the, as you described in one of your last chats, the biggest bank run, we've had in a long time. It was the biggest bank run in American history. Am I right?
Second largest, I think. Yeah.
Largest. So there we are. And then we're seeing all the spiraling that's going from that. So, that's why we've got so much to talk about, Dan. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we joked in the last episode about we want to kind of be the antithesis of the kind of like shock, open mouth kind of response to what's happening in the world, to bring a more nuanced conversation.
Totally.
But I do think in the nuts and bolts of what you've just shared, there is a genuine open mouth moment, because what shocked many of the course participants that have taken our Navigating Digital Assets course that you hosted, there were several things that came out from the discussion within that where you almost to the nail pinpointed certain events and dates, and it was almost like crystal ball like accuracy. And I know that some people were that they've gone back and said, how did you get that? It's so I think the timings of things are fascinating to witness.
They are fascinating, which is where again, and almost the reason we're not doing all those clickbait, oh my God, because we want to have these proper grounded discussions. But equally, even though we're not even doing that thumbnail, I'm not reacting like that either, because I'm curious and I'm always looking at it from a bigger picture. And what that does is give you a better perspective, gets you less kind of pulled around by the drama of the narratives in short term, and gives you a better understanding, and you can navigate better when you have that bigger understanding. Because when you understand what's going on, it's not so shocking. You can be more interested in it and stay more empowered. So the timings. We look at the the COVID scam. Kicked off in March again, and often what you see, and I've obviously been studying this a very long time. We've started our projects down in March because it's a really good time to start projects, start new energy. It's the budding of spring. But the powers that be are really at high level. They understand the whole natural cycle. So that's often. You see a lot of stuff coming up in March. They launch a lot of stuff midwinter. That's a kind of time, not time for growing. And equally in September, because that's often where consciousness is falling after the summer, and they're kind of setting the program for the year ahead. Obviously harvesting energy from the summer and then setting the program, which is why, the school year begins in September. Often new programming begins in September. And if you just look in history, a lot of the kind of false flags or big kind of dramatic, state operations often happen in March or September. So I'm always looking out those things. I never get deterministic about it, Dan, because people say, when's it going to happen? Because it's not like that. But with that curiosity, I'm always looking, and it's really interesting. Obviously, I'm tracking the crypto markets and markets as a whole all the time. And a lot of people who have, less of awareness of those cycles within crypto were getting very bullish, and almost getting bullish on a macro perspective, thinking, well, it looks like inflation's coming under control. It looks like they've sort of got on top of things. And I wasn't shouting from the rooftop, wait till March, but I was quietly saying, me and a few of my, close friends who have discussions like we do, Dan, sort of bigger picture, we're saying, just wait, we're in false flag season, we're in black swan season. Yeah. So a lot of those people are ready for black swans, and a black swan event just meaning a dramatic event of any type that can crash the markets like the COVID crash. But when you're aware that we're in financial reset and there's going to be so many levers pulled, that's why I don't get shocked, and that's why I'm psychologically prepared for them in advance. And so that when they come, I can be much more interested in them and not a victim of them sort of energetically or in terms of what actions I'm taking. So, yeah, I did talk about the Ides of March, and it has played out. And we're in that period, the Ides of March, and all roads lead to Rome. And I won't go into a long diatribe about the Ides of March, but anyone's curious, Google them and have a look into that. Or ask ChatGPT and get an AI opinion on it, as we alluded to in our chat before we came on today. So yeah, it's fascinating when you understand the bigger cycles, and I'm sure we'll talk more about cycles because all these things are cyclical, and it's not that I always say it's not the elites control the cycles; they just understand the cycles and want to harness them. But equally, this is the empowering side. This is a great time to launch, ideas, projects, because it's spring and budding. So we can do that. That's the point. Not just say they're launching their ideas and their kind of narrative. We can do it too.
Yeah. I think it's important, just self-reflection. As you were speaking, I was thinking, how many projects have I launched in the last month? And I was talking this over with my team at the end of last week. I think we were on project 9.
How many, going back to that New Year thing, how many ones did I know I had this down. I thought I'd try and launch in January, but it's not the time. That's why people try and make New Year's resolutions. It's very hard to make that change in January, just energetically, the way we are with the seasons, and often, as I said to you the last time, I give a lot of talks to winter. I've seen people's energy start to open up and ideas come through now, not in February and January.
Yeah, I mean, there's some simple things that have played out. I mean, just noticing that the sun, the sun rises earlier. I'm waking up naturally in alignment with the sun, and there is so much more energy in the morning first thing when I have that. So these cycles,
growth, expansion, energy, and growth. Yes. So we get in tune with nature, and so as dark as the dark magicians are, they understand the cycles of nature.
Yes. Now, those natural cycles, I think, many of us can relate to and observe. But as we're kind of speaking about some of those bigger picture trends, which I think is one of the key advantages of what we're trying to bring to this show, is a wider set of perspectives.
Absolutely.
But I'd imagine, as you were discussing some of those things, they may trigger some skepticism amongst some, but particularly those who have perhaps not looked at those wider cycles or patterns or institutional relationships. So what would you say to someone who's perhaps skeptical about these elements?
Well, I think go and look at the data, because that's what's really interesting. It's like, it's not just putting it as an esoteric idea. It's all backed up by hard data. And again, they tell you in plain sight. I think is it JP Morgan's quote of, he says, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. So the really top people do. And often what the playbook is, they rubbish things to the mainstream. So they on purpose demote astrology to the back of the newspaper and kind of laugh at it and say, here's a thing for, but actually in a deep astrological way, they're absolutely tracking it. And that ties into crypto at the moment, Dan. Part of this whole agenda, it all ties in, is they are putting the message out that crypto is a scam, it's a fad, and locking small players out. While quietly, they know it's the absolute future of everything and the baseline of the future. They're quietly buying up all the assets and telling you, don't get involved, it's scary. So they always want to veer you away, and put a certain viewpoint and get out there, whereas they are doing the opposite. And they know that. So, yeah, it's interesting if you look at the data, and it's twofold, because people can harness astrological things, but also it's affecting everything. The moon cycles affect everything. So even if we look at Bitcoin, Dan, really interesting. There are people who trade Bitcoin on the moon cycle. And even you go back, a good colleague of mine went and did a full report on it. He thought, I want to really nail this from the start of Bitcoin. If you looked at the before I say this is not financial advice,
Yeah, we should probably start saying that at the beginning of every episode. Yeah.
Generally, in terms of, you get a lot of pump energy after. How do I get around this? Because it can get confusing. So often you get microcycle highs on a new moon and microcycle lows on a full moon. So somebody did a sort of trading point. Some people do this, buy at full moon and sell at new moon. And generally over the history of Bitcoin, that would have been a 70% successful trade, which is good for trading. A lot of the top traders don't look at those kind of numbers. So, and if you just plot the graph, you can just see the peaks and troughs around full and new moon. So these energies are happening. So they happen naturally in markets as well as being leveraged. And, I really appreciate skepticism because it's right. You absolutely should be skeptical. That's what I love, is having a discernment for wherever the info comes from. Be skeptical. Go and find out yourself. Be healthily skeptical. And always say, don't drop your discernment, whoever's giving the message, even if you like it. Because that's, I think, can be really problematic in the kind of alternative media, is people leave the mainstream roller coaster, and then they can sometimes drop their discernment when they listen to alternative media. And that's where they can become victims of gatekeepers or, controlled opposition narratives, because it doesn't mean you have to be completely paranoid, but just keep the same level of discernment that you watch the BBC with, that you when you're listening to somebody in alternative media. And often when people hear a narrative they like, automatically they're not as discerning with it.
That's right.
So absolutely, and let's just look at, because I did call the eclipses, Dan. And interesting, we've got another eclipse. I'm not predicting anything for anybody who wants to predict eclipses, because I'm not deterministic what's going to happen, but I'm just really curious to look at it. So we've had 3 market, crashes on the last 3, eclipses. So we had, and it started on December the 4th, 2021, which is when they announced Omicron on that day. And then that crashed the markets. And then we had it around the collapse of Lunar, which is encoding the moon. And then we had it again with FTX. That's why, I looked at FTX come up. If it was totally organic, same with this bank collapse, Dan. Yes, they are bankrupt, but if it was totally organic, why do they always seem to happen on these really auspicious, esoteric and astrological dates? Because as you know how a bank run can happen, it's not that it was just suddenly bankrupt that day. It's they put the fear in, the word got out that the money's not there. So that's what happened to FTX. The money wasn't there, but that's how insiders can manipulate it to happen on a certain day, because they leak the messaging at a certain time to make it happen on that day. So just always say, look back and get curious and look into it, because it's all there. The data's there to see, and you'll start to see the patterns, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, apologies for diving off screen there. My son was in here a minute ago and he's turned the power off. Suddenly a warning mid-recording, this thing shuts down.
Between the sensors and your son pulling the plug, we've got agile down. And
yeah, exactly. So I think, even as you're explaining this, I can imagine some are still kind of skeptical, but I want to bring some other nuances to this cycles, particularly around the lunar cycles. I spent 8 years in corporate and within the financial services, within retail banking for part of that. And there was a really fascinating correlation between moon cycle, this is genuine, moon cycles and footfall. So we had footfall data within the branch banks. I was working with HSBC, something like 1,800 banks, and you get a kind of a weekly summary of the overall footfall and the shifts in both the number of people that would enter the branch on, and I don't remember the specifics of when it would, but you could see the observable difference and the difference in the sales data. It was insane. It was mad. Human behavior.
It could be that on a I used to run bars in old days, on a night out on a full moon. It can often be a bit wilder. Energy's a bit wilder. But I do want to, what's great about the deep level of research we do and look at holistically, you can, happily discount everything I've said about astrology and esoteric, because we're bringing all the other info as well.
Of course.
I always reassure people when I'm just do that. It's just almost like a confirmation or an interesting extra element. But the ground-based work of research is all there.
Yes.
So it's almost like on top. So you don't need to, and I really, that's what we say. I don't need consensus. Everybody to say, I've got to agree with you on that point, and then all your info's only worth it if you agree with that point. It's on top then. So I look at all those things and from every angle, and a lot of stuff, I always said to people on my financial research talks, as you do a lot of your amazing research, we're putting stuff that's all there, verifiable in the mainstream. You just got to dig for it and look for it and be curious. So yeah, I'm not deterministic about the astrology side, but it's when you get a holistic view, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
and it does give you a better perspective of why things are happening. And again, you can't be totally sure on everything, but it does. Yeah, I mean, I know it helps me, and it helps people I've spoken to get that extra perspective on what's going on.
Yeah, I think what's important there, it's a variable within a set of variables. It's not an entire, it's not a total determinant. But again, there's a second personal example. There's an app called Sleep Cycle, which I use to track my sleep quality, and again, that automatically overlays the stages of the moon, and it's fascinating just to watch how much my sleep quality follows the patterns of the moon.
Yeah.
So just to kind of close out on this point, if you are skeptical, keep a diary of your mood on a daily basis in alignment with the moon cycle, and just watch your patterns of emotion, because again, our mood. So there are a couple parts here, and it draws back to what you were saying, Sam, in terms of empowerment, because a lot of these things, that look at, particularly when I reference back that banking footfall data, most of that is going to be subconscious. People are
absolutely.
You're not walking out saying, "Oh, it's full moon last night. Yeah, I won't pop into town today."
I was going to buy some Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's not the conscious pattern, but it can become conscious, whether it's market cycles or lunar cycles or any other variable.
Yeah.
To your point around those that are able to use these data points are the ones that prosper. It's available to all of us.
Absolutely,
And there's a whole range of signals and cycles that I'm sure over the course of this podcast and within the Navigating the Financial Reset program that we recently launched that will actually talk through these and actually examine these with more depth. But the other interesting point, Sam, in the context of this overall episode, we said it has the financial reset started, and people have been asking, when is it coming? And you opened up by saying you've been getting talks on it for 2 years. So have we missed it? Is it already is it unfolding? When's it coming? Are we looking to kind of like a Black Friday style crash? Tell us a little bit about your take on like this iteration.
Well, that's why the cycle's so fascinating. So we can get to huge cycles and then slightly smaller cycles, and it's like everything. It's like fractals. They go in and out from the real small to the big. So they're playing out all the time. I mean, in a sense, Dan, you have a real tie to 2008 because you left the bank industry after that last one. That was a big wake up call to you, I know, from our last discussion. In essence, this crash, began in 1971. I mean, let's go back to there, which is really the start of this fake money. Okay, and that's why getting educated about what happened in 71 is so crucial. So really, if we talk about, I often talk about the 28-year cycles. The Second World War was a reset in itself. Okay, and we won't go deep into everything that happened there. That's another whole different podcast series. But if you understand that the bankers played both sides of those wars, that war as they do most wars, it was a reset, and obviously a financial reset came out after that. So in 1944, we had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which really kind of set the economic standards for the next 50 years, which putting the dollar as a reserve currency of the world on the gold standard, and the world kind of restarted from there, rebuilding after the war. And obviously, as we know, after every kind of reset, it's a bit of a power shift geographically, economically. But what's so interesting is that pretty much, and I always talk about these 28-year financial crisis cycles that play out, 28 years later after that, 71, 72, we had Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard. Now that's so critical to all of our, in our listeners' lives of where we are, because that was the beginning of real fake money. Okay, before you're handing around promissory notes that you can then take to a bank and you get the gold. So it's a way of transacting gold, really, in real tangible assets. But what was so interesting, Dan, is what essentially happened. I've always like to keep it in lay terms because this is what's so important: financial education that people can understand and access, and not think I hate finance; it's too confusing. Once you understand these core principles, it lightens things, and you can see clearly. In essence, what happened was the US, had a huge trade deficit by 1971. They had expanded their kind of debt by, and really defaulting on that debt. They didn't have enough gold. They owed a lot of gold. So rather than come out and say, okay, we're defaulting, we've screwed up here. Of course, they delivered a message in a completely obfuscated way, using different language, which confuses the people. No one knows what's going on. because Nixon's words are so fascinating. He came out and said, rather than say we're in trouble here, because we want to keep confidence, he said we are the economic power of the world and we need to protect the dollar from the speculators. Well, really, what you're saying is that people are owed, other countries are owed money that you genuinely owe them. You don't want to pay them and you can't pay them. Yes. So you're basically changing the game and you're saying, no, it's no longer backed by gold. We're going to change the game. But the language, again, is so important. And you see it in the recent Silicon Valley Bank. The language they use is always obfuscating, never clear, always massaging it. So you can say, if you're, and using jingoistic terms, so again, for the American patriots, he's saying, look, we are the strong, greatest economy going, and we need to protect ourselves against a threat. Whereas really, you're just saying we can't pay our debts that we duly owe to these other countries. So we're going to change the rules of the game. We're going to throw the monopoly board up and say, throw a wobbly and say, no more gold for your dollars. And what was so interesting then is that most people didn't understand what happened, Dan. But it was critical to where we are today, because it was the beginning of fake money, fiat currency backed by nothing. And if you look at the wealth inequality since 1971, that's where the equality started to go crazy. Because essentially what that meant was they could print money. The super rich, the bankers, the elites print money. With that money, they buy tangible assets. So literally, this is the Cantillon effect. It's in their hands first. They know it's worthless. They know it. They print out thin air. They go and buy tangible assets, commodities, land, housing, whatever. So they've got it for nothing. They got it for free. So they've done amazingly out of this deal. But by the time that increase in the money supply is filtered down to the people have been robbed through inflation. So it's not that it's not great for everybody, but it had to happen. It was incredible for them and terrible for the people. And we've been in that cycle since then, really. So that's, what are we? That's 50 years ago now, 50 plus years ago. And initially this ties into another cycle, like there's a 50-year kind of debt jubilee cycle then, and initially that's what I think we're coming to. That's part of the financial reset, which is a debt jubilee, which doesn't mean, some people I think push the idea that means we're all going to be freed of all debt and we're going to get free money. That's the kind of what I view as a little bit the controlled opposition, the Sara Jassara narrative. Because often what happens, they're encoding a truth, which is, there are debt jubilees, but really what that means is the same power structure expanding the debt bubble so much and then basically wiping out all of that and starting again. So that's really interesting, because 50 years on from 71, 72 is 2021, 22, here we are, 2023. So I think we are approaching a type of debt jubilee, but, not as some people kind of that hopium view of it's about us all, being given free money and doing that. It's actually just them resetting their old game in a new way, which we'll come into. So it's a long answer, but what's so important is, and it links into the kind of COVID narrative and all the laws coming in, that was a temporary measure. They said that coming off the gold standard was a temporary measure until we get our trade deficit down a bit, but of course it never went back.
Again, that's a whole conversation in itself around how disasters are used to, or crises, or that the same can be said around 9/11 or all the security and surveillance protocols that were temporary, not
it
temporary.
Never goes back.
All the things that we've seen with the COVID, not temporary, accelerating. Now, to draw on your point here around cycles as well, there's another really interesting observation, because everyone is kind of feeling it's almost like a tension bubble in the world right now. And that tension bubble is typically heightened if you spend a lot of time on Twitter, where it feels like the world is just in constant disarray, which, that platform has become, a symbol of the kind of culture war, if you will, the political division. But your point around the cycles, here's what's very interesting, where you talk about the widening inequalities over that period of time. What's overlaid with that, though, is a generalized increase in prosperity over that period of time. And Ray Dalio talks about this. We talked about Ray Dalio on the last episode, where there is a generalized increase in overall prosperity. Even if there is a widening inequality, the social order remains relatively consistent, meaning that you don't have any kind of grand kind of civil resistance or civil war or mass protests or, the kind of winter of discontent. But what's really interesting, as in this moment right now, looking at that cycle and where we are in that cycle, witnessing the cost of living situation, the recessionary patterns, the rise in inflation, the mass protests, the strike action, this kind of new winter of discontent. It's a reflection that overall prosperities began to falter as the inequalities rise, because there was a huge shift, a wealth transfer during the pandemic that was vastly accelerated. And the quality of life was maintained by the various protocols that were put in place. The schemes where people had their incomes replaced, 80% of their earnings, etc. A lot of people actually ended up better off because they weren't spending as much, they weren't going on holiday, they weren't shopping. So a lot of people were effectively paid a wedge to stay at home. So it masked the underlying. And I always describe what was happening over the pandemic. This is almost like a rug placed over the economic issues. Yeah. Because you're right. One of the other points was, this problem has been growing and growing, and the pandemic became a distraction. But now we're starting to see the curtains fall, because you mentioned Silicon Valley Bank, and the language point was so important. Just to touch on that very briefly, one of the key phrases that the CEO said, "This is not a time to panic." And that's really interesting, because from a language perspective, our brain doesn't always pick up on the negative. So it doesn't always take the knot. So when you say what someone's mind will subconsciously hear is, this is a time to panic. And actually, of course, that's been centered upon by a number of people, saying that was the moment that people did panic, and that triggered the run on the bank. Of course, there's other factors, but some of the other things you talked about around the asset, the balance sheet, we saw that they held a lot of long-term treasury bonds, which are heavily impacted now by the rise in interest rates. But one of the things that hasn't been talked about, maybe not a discussion, it's quite nuanced and specific for today, but the number of mortgage-backed securities that they also had on their balance sheet, which of course was a major factor in the past financial crisis, which no one's talking about. But then, you start to then see the wobble in the overall markets. Moody's are talking about downgrading the credit ratings of 6 of the major banks. There's been the fall of Credit Suisse. All of this is there's a contagion effect. And, there was almost like the media and the kind of powers that be were trying to kind of have this it's not a systemic issue. Silicon Valley Bank is an isolated problem. They primarily serve institutional and entrepreneurial client base. It's clearly not true. But as I see this unfold, I get now with renewed skepticism, because there is an event that's unfolding. To go back to the original point of where will this go? Is it leading towards a singular moment where there is a banking collapse and we have a Black Friday style unfurling of this problem, or is this going to continue in a more organic fashion? What's your take on, what role this collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank will play in the kind of unfolding of the next stages of this research?
Well, I think it is that balance down of it does have to happen, and it's kind of like going back to why people knew this would come even a long time ago, that fiat currencies backed by nothing have to fail. So the collapse is an inevitability, and that's why I was talking about, a financial reset does need to happen. But, that's why, but they want it on their terms. So it's not that this can continue and should continue. People are thinking, I don't want a financial reset to happen. What needs to happen, whoever's in charge, and, I always say, if they had nobody nefarious in charge, it would need to end, because this is a debt bubble that the final burst of it is inevitable. Currencies rise and fall, and all fiat currencies ended up failing in the end. That's by their nature. So I do see this as it's organic, but also the powers that be pull the levers when they want. So it's kind of a controlled demolition of something that needs to come down anyway, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So really, if you got your hands on lots of levers and media and the banks, and you can massage so many things that they are bankrupt. But that's my point. That bankruptcy, that situation is always there. So I always give the example of getting educated about fractional reserve banking. That was a big shift to me. When I watched, I think it was Zeitgeist Addendum. I don't know when, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever it came out. I don't rate the whole film, but the part about money in it is so powerful. People can find it. I think it is still on YouTube, because it's slightly controlled opposition, some of it. But the money side of it's really good, because you understand that fractional reserve banking means that you understand fully that the banks are creating this money out of thin air, and it's going over and over again. And then you get that really important pattern shift, which is so simple. I know a lot of listeners will be fully aware of this, but it's important to really embed it, and the people who aren't aware of it, that your money is absolutely not in that bank. When you get a loan, they've created out of thin air. You've then got this, liability. They've just created out of thin air. They put nothing up to back it. So let's give an example. We talk about this is a smaller bank. It's big, it's huge, but it's one of the smaller ones we followed up. But I looked this week at JP Morgan's balance sheet there, and they've got, I think it was 28 billion in cash and over 3 trillion in liabilities. Right? So there is one of the big boys that's under 1%. Right. So when you understand how leveraged, and this isn't conspiracy theory. This is just all mainstream. The people in the finance world know this. But it's important to understand because it gives that perspective of when you understand the game, you're more empowered to take better decisions. So understandably, the question, comes to me and, will come to us more than, should I get the money out the bank? Now, again, that decision's got to be yours. But rather than say, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't, if you understood the situation, you'd probably most likely come to your own decision of like, I don't feel comfortable leaving my asset wealth with a bankrupt entity and basically giving them an unsecured loan. Because that's what you've done. When you put your money in the bank, it is an unsecured loan to them, which is why when you get paid a tiny bit of interest, that's why, because you've loaned them that money. So that again is where education about the system, what's going on, in simple terms, is so powerful for you then to make better decisions and understand where your own risks are by leaving your assets, with bankrupt entities or entities that are so leveraged beyond belief that's highly risky. And I think this has begun. Obviously, the narrative. They may, often the thing is to sort of paper over and go, okay, we've calmed it, whatever, and then people get relaxed again, and it comes again. So I think it will be a series of these things, Dan. And I think really we're in this roadmap, which I've been talking about, of 2023 to 2025. I think it's really going to play out this next 2 years, which ties in interestingly. I saw a piece of news come across my desk yesterday. I've been long talking about, and this ties into crypto, the new financial messaging system, ISO 20022, which essentially is the new messaging system that's going to replace SWIFT in the future world. Now, that was scheduled to roll out between November 22 and November 25. That's why I was really looking at this window as the financial reset. Interestingly, it got delayed in November 22. It's just come across my desk that it's going live next week. That's really interesting. Yes. So again, the switch over, how that exactly plays out, no one knows, but the cogs are in motion now. That's what's so interesting. That's what's so visceral. Everything I've been talking about, I'm starting to see it play out in real time. So I think we could very well get dramatic things happen at certain times, but it's not going to be that binary. I think people want that. It's happened on a day. How did I do? Is it over now? It's going to play out for years.
Yes, and the ramifications of which will be felt for a period of time. Yes, I want to unpack what you've just said in a minute around the SWIFT, but just on the point of the cash in the bank, particularly for our UK listeners, last week we shared the details of our new Navigating the Financial Reset program, which is all about how do you safeguard your finances and protect your assets and look for opportunities to hedge the reset. And one of the things that we've already posted within that group, which is open access. You can get this particular piece of information is open access. You can get it anywhere. But the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So in the UK, if there was a run on the banks and there was a collapse of a banking institution, if you recall from the prior financial collapse with the banking crisis in 2008, there was effectively an insurance scheme put in place to protect the consumer's money. So if you're a single eligible person, you get £85,000 of your money protected in banks, building societies or credit unions, or up to 170,000 in joint accounts. Now, there are some technicalities around that, particularly around the nature of the banks, because that led to people then diversifying where their money was held. I remember well, because I was still working in banking at the time, and people would literally come and withdraw huge sums of money and go and put it in another bank. But there are some nuances specifically around who owns the bank. So, for instance, if your money's in HSBC and you've got money in First Direct, they're under the same ownership structure. So you wouldn't be protected in both banks. You're only protected in one of the banks. So it is important to actually look into the guidelines to see, where is your money held, and what is the ultimate ownership structure. Now, you don't have to go you don't have to go into the complex research. If you go to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, or you look inside our platform, you'll see the links to this particular set of articles, and it breaks down where those ownership structures are. But it's important, and most developed countries now have some sort of similar scheme. In the US, we saw that the depositor scheme played out with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. People's deposits were fully protected. They actually went above and beyond the limits in this case, but we cannot rely on that. And even with these insurance schemes in place, I still hold a level of not skepticism. I have seen money paid out under these schemes during my time in financial services, but still, my distrust of authority and banks.
Well, it's twofold, Dan. Your distrust, you're quite understandable and say very valid distrust of authority, along with we haven't lived through what's coming.
Right.
So I always put a caveat. Again, I'm not a legal eagle, but I've got legal eagle friends who I've said, can you go through all that FCS paperwork about the 85 grand? That's the headline that Gordon Brown gave in 2008. Your 85 grand. There, it's full of caveats.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Full of caveats. So again, it's not sort of, as we know, there's full of loopholes, and in times of emergency, everything go out the water. And I did have a woman at one of my talks last year who works in the financial services industry, and she said it's common knowledge within that industry. And I don't know what, get your opinion on, Dan, having been in there in 2008, is she said, if it was a mass run on banks, we had a real situation, I think they got £9 per head to cover, you. So the reality is, if again, individual little banks going down, I'm sure they can. If it gets to that mass level, I'm not saying it will, but the money isn't there to cover that. So it's absolutely right. You need to do your due diligence and decide what your level of risk, appetite or mitigation is around that. And also, it's the other side, Danny. Even if you're going to get covered by that, how much do you want to go through that process?
Yes, of course.
That's the other. I think that's the other aspect that's not sovereign, is that even if in the end you get paid out, are you locked out of your funds for a certain time? Are you in negotiations? Because this has happened before. We always go back to Cyprus 2013. Anybody who had over 100,000 euros in the bank shut on Friday, by Monday they'd taken a haircut. That's gone.
Yes.
No negotiation. So I think, again, it's like all these things, even if those things are in place, you are beholden to third parties and being involved with bureaucracy and that fight. And again, energetically, that's exhausting.
Yes, it is.
And you're because really you're not working hard to get more money. You're just fighting to get your dues. So that's why mitigating and having some level of self-custody and finding what works for you. And again, it's got to work for you. We always come back to that point, Dan. It's personal. Everyone's in a different situation. But just by being aware of that and looking at it, and if you feel overexposed and you're stressed by it, then you are, because you are the best barometer. You feel it. So, and I just want to give one other aspect to, I think, what may play out. How things might ramp up is also the cyber attack narrative.
Yes,
which I've seen start to come through a little bit. I think a month ago I was trying to send a parcel, and it was talks of cyber attack taking down the post office. So in the COVID narrative was foreshadowed by Event 201. We've also had Cyber Polygon foreshadowed by the World Economic Forum, and they're putting it out there, that messaging out there. So that's something that could really shake things up. That could be more than the bank run, something that's really dramatic. And I always talk about that having a problem-react solution having a quite desired effect to bring in CBDCs, because a cyber attack on the legacy banking system, which is based on old tech of everyone having their ledgers, if you took out a few big banking servers, because of the way the banking system is, that could cause carnage. If people don't know what's got, accounting books have been wiped out, it's confusing. Blockchain technology, which is what CBDCs are built on, does answer that problem. So again, I always say, I'm not saying this is going to play out, but that is a scenario that's very possible to cause a bit of panic in the banking crisis, whatever. And also, we need a better, more secure system, which is the blockchain system of distributed ledger technology, because won't get technical as always to keep it accessible. But generally what that means is that even if you take out a few banking servers, everybody's hosting the ledger across the network. Therefore, it doesn't matter there aren't points of failure as there are in the system we have now. As long as somebody's got the accounting book intact, then everybody's got it intact, so we know where we are. So that's another thing I look at is the possible ramping up of the cyber attack narrative.
Yes, that's important. And you're absolutely right. Again, from experience of working in the banking sector, there was a period of time, and I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the vaults. You have these paper, like years and years of paper records. There's like the entire folders and files, and but that doesn't exist anymore. The legal limit for keeping that paperwork is 6 years.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right that, and whilst of course the banking sector does have protocols in place for cyber attacks, they do have server backups, etc. But we don't know the sophistication of cyber attacks in the modern age. This is why people talk about these existential threats. People like Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about this technological advancement comes with many possibilities and potential, but at the same time, these real heightened risks. And but again, as you've pointed to, blockchain is a way, the decentralized nature of that, distributed nature of that more specifically, is a way to mitigate that risk. Now,
which is why I always talk about the if we take out the nefarious side of CBDCs, which we're absolutely against and awful, purely from a tech point of view, the digital system we have, most of our banking is digital anyway, it is a far superior solution. So I always say this, that, if you had nobody nefarious in charge, absolutely, it's a cheaper, more secure, more ergonomic in every way, settlements quicker. So it is a great technological advance, which is why it will come in. That's why I feel that the advance in that is inevitable. But I always say it doesn't mean it's in the Chinese social credit score nature of it is inevitable. That does depend on our pushback and our behavior towards it, and resisting and stuff. So, but understanding the baseline tech is important.
Yes.
I always talk about that. And that's why hopefully a big part of our chats, Dan, is making that accessible to anybody, right? In really simple terms, that, distributed ledger technology, which is what the banking system, and that's why they talk about DLTs a lot rather than blockchain, because it's not, as we talk about, it's not the freedom decentralized version of blockchain that Bitcoin is. It's just using the tech of distributed ledger technology, meaning that everybody hosts a ledger, therefore there aren't points of failure by taking out a single bank's, servers. So that could be a way in for them, which is problem resolution. We've got this great problem, and that's caused panic, and you may have lost some money, and we just sort that out. And here is the solution.
That
could speed up. Again, I think that roadmap is there, but that could speed up the kind of adoption of DLTs within that.
I agree. I think everything we're witnessing now will accelerate all of those things. I just want to kind of close up on a couple of open loops around the FCSC. You've made some really valid points about those loopholes. I think the underlying premise I was raising is that now's the time to evaluate your exposure.
Absolutely. Evaluate, look at it.
And the second point here is a lot of people say, well, what should I do to take my cash out of the banks? Now, let me give you a couple of words of caution on that from personal experience. Firstly, I genuinely dealt with a customer who withdrew a six-figure sum from the bank in cash, took it home, and subsequently they had a house fire, the money was burnt, and their home insurance covered them for £1,000.
Wow.
£1,000. So if you are going to do that, firstly, get a secure storage unit that is fireproof. Secondly, check your insurance.
Yeah.
And just be sensible with that. And the other piece around this, again, I've dealt with another customer, 25,000 this time, in old money. They took their cash out of the bank years ago, like 30 years ago. They put it in a safe in their house. They brought it into the bank to exchange it, and the currency had expired. And it was most currency types will have a window of time of which you can exchange it into the latest notage. And the warnings are issued around that. It's a final call. This is going to be taken out of circulation. You've got this date and time to actually get your notes circulated.
Well, it happened to the paper 20s and 50s, didn't it, last year?
Yeah, exactly. And again, this person, they couldn't change their money. So these are important caveats. Now,
I think that's there are some points, and there's so many things we can do, but it needs this discussion, needs to look at it. And that's what we're going to, obviously, that's why we set up the Navigating Financial Reset, support program, is to look at all those things, because there are things to do, and there are loads of ways you can do it and improve your situation. There isn't a panacea of just do that and then you're all sorted. But there are absolutely so many creative ways and good ways that work for you that you can improve where you are, and you can get better peace of mind. You can So what we talk about is decentralizing your assets, as much as is helpful and possible for you, and there are loads of ways to do that. And yeah, there is so many, I like to be open-eyed to the tools that the power structure have to massage the situation, and they are myriad. And I don't say that to scare people or to be negative. It's just being realistic. But once I understand they've got the tools, then that helps me to take better decisions myself. So you're absolutely right, Dan, that feeling of sitting in loads of cash. Well, should we go through a currency reset? If you want your one-to-one, you're going to have to go and put that back in the bank.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's also a tool they could use to get a lot of black money off the street and say, well, hang on, if you absolutely, you can have one-to-one, but all that money, you need to put it through, you need to declare where it's come from. So be aware. I think that's what's important to understand as you come towards a potential currency reset of some sort, is that if you're holding something that is beholden to a change in the law or legislation, even we think is nonsense, it's not, I don't believe it happened like this, but always give the most extreme example, midnight tonight, it's no longer legal tender, or you need to go and swap it over for CBDCs. You get your value, but you need to get it. So it's always bearing in mind those scenarios. And that's why, we'll talk loads about this in the course and ongoing, why the smart people, as it comes towards a currency reset, even though they don't know how it's going to play out, they get on the asset side of the equation. And I always use that extreme example of that a can of chickpeas today is a can of chickpeas tomorrow, whatever happens in the world, whereas something that is centrally, centrally bought in, controlled by a centralized force and is dictated upon its value, and its legality in the world, and it has tender, anything could happen to that in the next 24 hours. I'm not expecting that to happen in the next 24 hours for anybody panics, but your can of chickpeas.
What are the moon cycle saying, Sam? Is it tomorrow?
Again, if you want to clickbait, you would go, can of chickpeas now. Midnight tonight, something's going to happen. So it's just understanding that, and then you can really navigate from that point of view. So educating yourself around all those areas is so important.
Yeah, and we got a little bit into the weeds with the kind of financial services compensation scheme, the strategies, which is, the exact reason, understandably, as we're talking about these matters, people are going to get concerned, and with or without this conversation, it's in the news everywhere. We're seeing, even the big banks like Credit Suisse, nose diving in terms of their share price. These are all valid and real concerns, and people are looking for solutions, which is exactly why we've put that Navigating the Financial Reset program together to get into the detail of these conversations, which is required, is to get into the strategies and the tactics.
Absolutely, because people are stressed anyway, and it's a lot less stressful when you're actually taking positive action. I know it because I see it in myself, my family, my clients. You've taken positive action, then you are taking back control just by taking action, because you're not always good argument. A lot of people, we've all lived in our lives where we're avoiding taking action, but actually we're just as stressed or more stressed not doing it. So we're in avoidance, but actually we're not in avoidance sitting pretty. We're in avoidance feeling, a constant level of stress. So, and that's where I say shining a light on these things will give you more clarity, and you take better steps and feel better about it, rather than just having this feeling of it's coming. And getting out of that paralysis is so important, Dan. And there are so many things we can do on all sorts of levels.
Yeah, I mean, that background anxiety can create that kind of paralysis in any endeavor. I've had it in business when I first started out in 2012, got completely overwhelmed, got really into kind of an inner state of fear and uncertainty, and it completely led to paralysis by analysis. And the moment I actually then got into action and actually started taking positive steps forward, all of that fear started to dissipate, that unease, that anxiety. But it's having the knowledge where to start, which is why we're pulling this together. You'll find the details in the description. Sam, I want to move to talk about another concern that came up during the course of that conversation. One of the things that's been raised a number of times, you're talking there about a cyber attack on the banks, that could have catastrophic effects, which is right, but one of the concerns that people raise when we talk about things like cryptocurrency is, what if the internet goes down? We see this over and over as an objection, and I think it's an important one to address. And we talked about it in our crypto myths episode, but I think it's a related concern really here, because it's a similar concern to the fact that the banks systems could go down. What happens? Yeah. Could you outline the difference then, and why it's a valid concern, whilst the solution can provide some comfort?
Yeah, and it is a valid concern for people. I always give, my personal thesis, which is I think that the internet is the control grid, of the world. Therefore, it's not likely to be pulled. It might be manipulated slightly to cause fear and panic in the short term, but to pull the plug on that, and I really enjoyed your chat with Simon Elmer last night on the Elevate platform, Dan, that looking at how much that is the control grid. If you pull the plug on that they lose total control. So, but even looking at apocalyptic ideas of EMPs and all that kind of stuff, you can't rule anything out, and I never do. I don't know the future. I might be able to call some eclipse dates and whatever, and something might happen, but I don't know the future, and I don't leave anything off the table. My thesis, because if you let all those things in there, I don't expect them all to happen, but they're all there. So I'm not, if they happen, okay, that's fine. We go from there. But yeah, I think what's interesting is sometimes you get the people being really anti-crypto because, oh my God, what if the internet goes down? Well, your point, if the internet goes down, all your banking's gone.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's not all. I think that's my point. Firstly, is yes, compared to cash, you've got an issue, but you haven't got an issue compared to what you're doing. A lot of people are doing. If somebody's fully intangible assets, okay, then absolutely understand that. Well, I don't want to move into something that's digital because the internet might go down. But most people, a lot of their transactions are on that anyway. So almost for that answer, view crypto the same as viewing, well, that's all your internet banking gone down. That's all your cards and everything. So yeah, I do absolutely think having tangible assets as well, for the most extreme examples, is great. The difference between obviously blockchain is that it's an immutable ledger that's still there when the internet comes back on. It's there. It doesn't get destroyed by servers going down. So it's more secure in that sense. And I always think if the internet goes down, we're into a whole different scenario. If that really did happen, then we are into kind of more Mad Max times and a real shift. And therefore I'm not really concerned about my Bitcoin at that stage. But again, there are people looking at Bitcoin over ham radio. I think we'll dig into some of this stuff and talk to real Bitcoin people looking into other ways of networks of decentralized internet, Dan, as well, which comes into it, all decentralized ways. So absolutely the most extreme example, yeah, the internet comes down, but then I've got a lot of the freedom I'm looking to get with my crypto and my decentralized assets by the internet coming down. So again, in terms of hedging it, I've got the benefit. But if I think the internet probably isn't what's going to be restored, then at least I've got decentralized assets on the blockchain rather than being the legacy system where you're really locked, because that does depend on, as I've talked about before, tangible ideas of, that Russian contact I had of when the SWIFT system goes down, you're going through a legacy bank, you are in no control of that transaction. That can be a switch they've done. Whereas if you're on the blockchain, that's permissionless and happening regardless of jurisdictions or where you are in the world. So it has many more qualities, decentralized qualities, versus the digital, legacy system you have. In the scenario of everything goes down, it's Armageddon, well, absolutely, yeah, there isn't any internet, and I'm not concerned about my digital assets at all at that point. I always give that answer, Yes, yeah. And I think a lot of people, I diversify across all asset classes. I always want to give that balance where I think that's why people are responding quite well, is I'm not get everything into crypto, fully, get your everything we want in crypto. It's part of the, we always talk about tools now, don't we? Loads of tools for all scenarios, because that's really the hedging. And that's really being wise, because you've got, don't disclose any possibility, And we talked about it. I think, I don't know if it's on the pilot or just in our own discussions. We've had so many discussions, is that kind of apocalyptic view for me is not a reason to not take positive proactive action based on how the world is today, because that's a massive gamble, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We go, I'm going to set my stall out for an EMP and no internet world. I support, I have that as part of my, tiny area. Okay, I'm open to that. But to set that as your stall and say, based on that scenario, I'm not going to do anything, is kind of, you're missing out building all potential, benefits for yourself and projects. And because it's almost like going, well, and I do see this like in the preppers world, and I respect it. I said, I always respect everyone's angle and what they're looking at. But the preppers are almost willing it. They want it to come, and you set their stall out for, complete collapse, and have got to be. But then, I don't, you're missing out on creating things for the world that is happening and navigate within it. So I always say I'll give a long answer to that, but does that answer your question?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of dynamics there that I think really are powerful. Again, not to rule anything out. That's as a risk mitigation strategy.
Yeah.
And again, working on corporate finance, risk mitigation is always a big part of the conversation. Diversification of assets is a big part of the conversation. But you're right in the terms, if you take the kind of big picture view of the kind of risk factor from a control perspective, everything we're seeing emerging from digital IDs to the potential for programmable central bank currencies, and I like the fact you made that distinction. It's an important one that's unfortunately not made enough. But that's the control mechanism, is the programmable aspect, which isn't set in stone, and as a point of resistance. But all of that mechanism is interwoven in the it requires connectivity. All of that mechanism. So that's one side of the equation. Now the other side of the equation of power and control is the monetary, the profit system.
Yep.
And the reality is, if the internet was to cataclysmically collapse, that flow of money would almost stop instantaneously.
Yeah.
And of course, you could speculate to the extreme order of what that could lead to as what the chaos would result in, and how that potentially would accelerate a further transfer of wealth. And you could go down that track, and it's fair enough to do that. But ultimately, in the short term, it's just going to lock out any financial transactions.
Yeah.
And that does not play into the interests of those who are trying to accumulate more. But I think it is important to consider all these variables.
Yeah.
And we have, most of us have probably experienced a time where, you've been to a cafe or a shop and there's been a power cut and it goes old school. You have to pay in cash. And you get the person at the till is writing down each individual transaction. We are resilient as a species.
Yeah, but even going to the cash argument, because again, you'd have some cash, that's great, I support that as having that. But if the whole system's gone down, most of that cash is locked in. How does that work?
Yes.
Just think through the scenarios fully.
Yes.
Who's got their cash ready? How does that work? It would be a reorganization of everything.
Totally.
That's why I use the Mad Max scenario, which is we're in a totally different ballgame. So kind of like that's a huge pivot point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if it was that cataclysmic collapse, even if you did have cash, most vendors would just not take it. They because keeping a record of transactions in the way I've described is an absolute nightmare. Reconciliating all of that. So it would be total system collapse. And again, looking
huge inequality, because the system, not everyone's got access to the cash. Who's hoarding it? There's so many variables. It's a discussion itself. How would that play out?
Yes.
It's not as simple as it continues on. It's a completely different scenario. And I'd argue pretty unlikely. And what's interesting, it almost goes to the psychology of things, Dan. Although he's mainstream, I do think Raoul Pal's got really good talks about having an investment mindset, of how smart people understand that when serious crashes happen, okay, the psychology is so scary of the markets tumbling, and we could see all these bank failures, whatever. There's a kind of feeling that humans get that it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's almost like everyone forgets that the world will continue. And the people who can keep their cool, and keep their cool at all levels, for what they're doing, realize the world, it's shifting, but it's not going to end. Therefore, a lot of things it's not the end of everything. And that's often the narrative, is like, it's the end of everything, whereas, where FTX was the end of crypto. Well, it's a lot, it's forgotten already, and the end of crypto, Bitcoin's up, the crypto market's up about 40% since. So that's a funny way to end, So, but, it's like from an investment point of view, a lot of those people do extremely well in these crashes because they know that, everything's just extremely cheap or on fire sale.
Mm.
It's not going to go away. Technology's not ending. Commodities aren't ending. The need for things aren't ending. Life will go on. It shifts. So I think that kind of apocalyptic end of the world feeling is something that's being, I understand people have it for what's going on, but I think my thesis, to share is that the world is going to continue.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm preparing for the world to continue. Yes, it's going to shift and change, but, it's, building things. And again, I give this example, Dan. Should I build a whole thesis based on the world continuing, and I've got, crypto portfolios, digital gold and silver, some of those things, and it all we have a massive, I don't know, EMP and in 10 years or what, who knows, like the most appropriate idea. I'm not going to go, oh, I shouldn't have done all that. I'm just going to go, right, we'll wake up tomorrow and we go from here. Yes. So, you know, I think that's the point, is that the pivoting aspect. And I think that's what I talk about. That's a huge gamble to put all your eggs on the complete approach and say, well, because of that, I'll do nothing. And I was having a good chat with a friend and a client yesterday who was just looking back at the last 3 years, and they'd actually been to Tanzania recently. And really interesting to realize that it's so intense, the narratives here and what's going on in the West, and particularly in the Western cities, that you go to a place where, hang on, there's nothing happening here. And the people are going on as normal. It's just kind of interesting to remember that it's not happening everywhere. And especially being intense, and obviously us researching it and looking at all the angles, we can become so immersed in it that we kind of forget sometimes that life is going on at a very good level in lots of places, and that life will go on. I've lost my train of thought. There was a point around it.
Well, life will go on.
That one, almost in that intense 2 years, and it was incredibly intense, Dan. You know, look back at, you know, what we went through in 2020, 2022. You know, the real visceral intensity nature of it. But so much of the apocalypse stuff that a lot of people would have been thinking then haven't happened. You know, yes, it's been dramatic, and yes, it is dramatic, but it isn't the end of anything. You know, it isn't like we're all suddenly round up in FEMA camps. We're all doing this. Life does go on, and we've been able to pivot. So I think I want to give that kind of positive message that it will be dramatic. Things will be dramatic. We can, you know, pivot and keep going, but what we've been doing so brilliantly, all of us. And, you know, what's exciting is that this is forcing us, as we've all said, to get better solutions and to get better habits about what we were doing before anyway. So if we can look in that light, these things are only going to heighten that call to take better action and create better things. So that's the positive side of what's going on, is the call to improvement.
Yeah, and I love that how, you know, the nature of this conversation always comes full circle, because to me this points right back to personal empowerment and self-sovereignty, because by examining possible worst case scenarios in an emotionally unattached way,
exactly,
you get power. You gain your power back because you look at it as it is, not worse than it is.
Yep.
And you're examining it through a lens of, let's just look at the possibility of this and the probability of this and what would happen. And you're mentally and practically preparing yourself for that outcome, not as though it will happen, but but if it did happen, here's how you respond rather than react. Because what's happening right now, a lot of this anxiety, there's a lot of anxiety attached to these possible, but or in all likelihood, improbable outcomes. And that anxiety is what keeps us completely stifled, and it puts people in that state of panic. And there is a heightened state of panic in the world right now. And actually, all of these negative narratives that they play out in the culture, they play out in movies, they play out in music. That sense of possibility isn't a mainstream conversation anymore. That sense of optimism, of positivity. Who's going to start that? If you're looking to someone else to start that conversation about a more inspiring vision of tomorrow, well, you're waiting for someone else to lead it. Why can't it be you? You know, why us? You know, why can't we lead that more positive vision of tomorrow? Because where the power comes from is being ready for anything.
Yes.
Just being ready for anything. Mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, financially, practically ready.
That's the core.
That's the core. And I've described Sam as a rock in the river. You know, having that ability to be there in your just total sovereign power, you know, not panicking. Because look what happened during the COVID chapter. People were like panicked, like hysteria hit, drama. The world is wired for drama right now.
Yeah, and they want you there. They will absolutely want you in that. You know, they want the people in the alternative to be in that place. You know, they know there's an alternative. They know there are people awake to it, but they want you in fear and in thrall. And again, I always say, if we can get in curiosity rather than kind of beholden thrall to the theatre that's playing out, that's the kind of final difference. It doesn't mean I switch off to it, and we're researching, we're looking at it, but curiosity and rather than, you know, thrall and beholden and obsessed, because that's that point. I'm aware of their plans and I'm busy with my plans.
Yes, indeed. And that's how you take the power back. That's how you get really clear upon what's possible. And ultimately, there is risk in every angle you look at. There's risk in taking no action. There's risk in taking action. There's risk in investing. There's risk in not investing. You know, in the Buddhist philosophy, you know, the everything is suffering. Like there's suffering and pain in taking action, but there's also suffering and pain in not taking action. You have to weigh up, are you experiencing more pain in the uncertainty and the doubt than you would be the suffering and pain of having to do the work? Not just, investing in a course like our navigating digital assets and just letting it sit there like shelf development, but actually doing the work to develop your knowledge, gain the wisdom, and then the sense of courage and power to actually then take action. Because it does take work, and it is, in an ever complex world, it takes mental energy. But we have to be, that's an investment. It's not just, in learning is an investment in yourself, and it's an investment in possibilities. But it's ultimately what brings you to a sense of power, so that in any given environment, and if you look at the history of all the books that have been written on great leadership, leadership is be able to act in spite of fear. And that, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to act in spite of it. So, and I think that's the invitation that's unfolding right now. And that's really, Sam, with all the things we talk about, ultimately, I think what we share is that desire to bring people to that place of personal power and sovereignty where they are prepared, but not just prepared. They're in motion. They're in action.
And so absolutely, we always talk about it's the balance. There's going to be some mitigation, some protection, but also some creation.
Yes,
because it's a self, projecting profit. I've lost the words. If you believe you're screwed and there are no opportunities around, and you believe all the doors are shut, which is
self-fulfilling prophecy.
What was the word? Say it again, Dan?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, so I've just lost that word. Had a brain fart hole. So. If you believe that, regardless of what their plans are, that does, play out for you. And I think, I've experienced that even in crypto, Dan, myself. If I believed that this is just a bear market, there's no money anywhere, whatever, but by staying in the space and staying curious, I'm picking up opportunities all over the place. I'll get a great example, right? Everyone's being squeezed. Okay, we know that. Okay, the cost of living crisis, that's engineered as well. We're being squeezed. They want people to feel the squeeze, because I always give the example that the possible CBDC rollout will be a little bit of an economic relief and boom for people, which is why I don't believe they'll get mass resistance, because it won't be a social credit score overnight. It'll be very similar to what they have, almost identical, but we'll have a little bit of a maybe economic relief and boom after this squeezing period. But, that's all happening. But just by me staying in the space and being curious, I'm picking up what I call free money. And I've just talked about it in the course. I've put something in the Navigating Digital Assets course there, which is anybody can do by changing your habit. You can pick up an extra 600, plus pounds a year. I'm doing it. My family doing it. My clients are doing it for nothing during a time where you could easily believe there's no money anywhere. And this is the way of absolutely, they've got agendas, but we are so powerful to find opportunities if we stay open to them. They're always there. So people who stay in that mindset and have the work ethic of saying, I'm going to stay and look and learn. It's not just the mindset, it's both. Yes. It's mindset of abundance with action. There are always opportunities. There are always things. It's an abundant world. They want you to believe it's not abundant. They want you to believe that there's no way out of being squeezed and whatever. And yes, that is real, that they are squeezing you, but also there are these opportunities if you just keep your eyes open. So, and some of it's about just changing habits and getting proactive. So I found it really interesting, Dan, because it's been a great barometer of, I know what it's like because I've been there myself. So when I speak about people being stuck, it's not, I know that because I've been stuck so often in my life. I know what it's like. And in fear and paralysis. So it's not me preaching from I going, why are you stuck? I understand it. This process I've been in the last 2 years is about me going through that unsticking process and getting moving. So, there's an opportunity there, which I talk about in the course, just added a resource to it where literally you follow a few steps. I give this on, Dan. I bank with NatWest in the UK. I never use my NatWest banking card ever because I don't get anything for it. I funnel all my fiat spending, that's going to come in digital form through some crypto debit cards, particular ones, and I get paid huge levels of crypto cash back that I could even move into fiat cards if I need it, or I can stack as a free investment in blue chip assets. So these options are there. That's, just by changing a habit, doing a bit of work and staying open to them. They didn't come knocking on my door. I was always looking around, talking to people, seeing them. And so that's what I think is exciting, is that, whether it's that, there are loads of opportunities all the time, whatever's going on. So staying open to them you know, it's like anything. When you're energetically open to anything, whether it's love or money or, you know, or opportunities, a huge part of the energy of getting those things it starts from you, doesn't it? If you're open to them, you can receive them. If you don't believe they exist or you're close to them, they're not going to come chasing, knocking your door. So I really want to say there are loads of opportunities in all sorts of ways, and by staying that energy and being around good people and staying curious and doing the work, they're there for us. You know, so that's why I always want to give it the positive message, which is absolutely, you know, I've increased my revenue, my family revenue through a time where everyone's saying there's no money around. It's there to be picked up, you know. So I invite you to come and pick it up.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's more money in the world today than there was yesterday, and there's more opportunities in the world today than there was yesterday, and there's more creative potential in the world today than there was yesterday. Now, I think we're kind of coming into the closing stretch of this episode, but I can imagine that the kind of critical response would be nothing's ever free, Sam, and I would agree. Let me tell you why I'd agree nothing's ever for free, because you have to do the work. There is an exchange of your time for value. So even if it's a simple set of steps to do what you've done, to have that accumulation of crypto, which you've outlined in the digital assets course, made it really simple for people. People still don't do it.
No, this is what's really, that's why I wanted to say it's a barometer. And again, no judgment. I understand.
No, absolutely.
Been there. In essence, people are struggling. It's almost like, it's again, how hard is it to change habits? So in a sense, this is not, even that example, there's nothing really hard about it. It's a real simple setting up another. If you can do online banking, you can do this. We're not even really dealing with crypto. So, again, that veil of it must be complicated. I don't want to do it. It's crypto. It's scary. If you're doing online banking and you can do this. And it's literally that I've experienced that thing of stuckness of not changing habits. That literally, but I'm saying if any of people are thinking there's no money around, I feel really squeezed, it's there if you just change a little habit and do it. And you're absolutely right. It might take, persistence is key, Dan. So often in these new setup things, I think people start setting up and then they get stuck somewhere. And it can be like, their KYC didn't go through properly, something the app got, but persistence gets you there. But so often there's almost a quite good, maybe it's a built-in challenge. So how much do you want it? If you really want it, you'll get through and you'll get there. But often, a roadblock comes in and you go, and I understand it, we're busy, we're pulled around. But by focusing on some of these examples, you can get these opportunities, you can get there. And the short term, so maybe it's like a horrible grind of a few hours going through the setup, whatever, and maybe sending an email. But then once it's set up, you've got a revenue stream. You've got a revenue stream coming in. So you do need to put the legwork in and persistence. And when you understand the values there and you have that shift, which I've seen in people, the people I know said, they're so excited, they're loving it.
Yes.
Because it doesn't mean that's what I'm focused on, but that's just an extra little thing coming in. So people are building a free crypto portfolio, and understandably, this is what's powerful about that solution is people are squeezed. They might say, I want to have a crypto portfolio because I understand this is going to be huge over the next 5-10 years because it's the baseline technology of the future and I'm investing early. Well, there's a way of getting a free portfolio.
Absolutely. Yes.
Absolutely free by just doing your normal spending. So
absolutely. I even to take a parallel example, like my dad is, my parents, getting them into online banking was hard work. They're finally there, and it's like second nature to them now. But my dad's got set up on all these cashback schemes now, and he's, he loves it. He's always earning money back on his purchases, and even if it's only small amounts here and there, it still adds up, and it's the same is true of what you've just shared.
Well, because you're in this space, you're an early adopter of fintech solutions. So the rewards are really there for early adopters. Yes. So I can compare, I know that your dad's getting some, but the rewards you get from this stuff is ridiculous almost because it's about being early to it and it will shrink over time. So being an early adopter means doing more work, Dan, because you've got to learn more skills, but the rewards are much greater.
Yes.
Yes. That's what's really powerful. And again, so they're absolutely loving it.
Yes.
They put that bit of work in and they're getting those rewards. So it's there to be picked up.
Absolutely, and you're right. The early stages of Bitcoin, they were literally giving away entire Bitcoins. So you're right. There's a higher learning curve, but the risks come. The rewards that come with that is exponentially higher. So we've been talking about some of these strategies, Sam, which are. I'm just going to very briefly let people know where these can be found. So If you weren't aware, we have a course called the Navigating the Digital Assets course, and I'm not going to go into a full pitch, don't worry, but I'm just going to inform you what's available. And we are posting, and Sam is posting these different strategies in there. I also want to acknowledge, when you are in a stuck state or your back is against the wall, how hard even the smallest of actions can be. Like this time 10 years ago, quite literally this time 10 years ago, I just started my business. I got myself into a huge amount of debt. I had an enormous amount of struggle. And I remember feeling how almost physically paralyzed I was, mentally, physically, complete stuck state. I've been through it. So I can, when we're talking, I think Sam and I can both relate to these kind of challenges. So it's coming from a place of knowing. It's coming from a place of experience. And
that's why, Dan, I'm never critical. I just know what's going on. So when I say that, it's not being critical.
Of course not.
You can't take the action. I understand totally, pulled around by so much more intense stuff and your priorities. But I'm just noticing what's going on. Is that being able to shift and find that time in certain areas. And again, it doesn't have to be that. It can be any area. Is often, as we know, because I've been it, Dan. I've been spent my life before as being a procrastinator. I'm turning my own ship around. My family, my mum's turning. We call it turning the ship around.
Nice.
It's, we've all had, I'm totally open. Had terrible habits around organisation and this is what's exciting for me. Actually, this is a call to do that. So I'm absolutely relating to all those what I'm seeing in people. That's why I think hopefully I can communicate, because I'm not like some whiz guy who's been on top and in finance for 50 years and I'm top of all that and saying, why have you done this? I've come from that stuck place and that just to this by shifting my trajectory. So I completely understand that. Absolutely, it's important to get that across.
Definitely, and when I went through that struggle, actually one of the most important things was around getting around people that had been through the same struggles, but had found a way to get several steps ahead. And that's really what we've tried to prepare within the course. And again, like I said, I'm not going to go into the full detail, but we've got the Navigating Digital Assets course, which educates you on the fundamentals of a lot of the things we've been talking about today, crypto, blockchain, how to take the first steps. But even if you take advantage of the course just to learn the strategies that Sam shared around the kind of free crypto that's available by taking certain actions, that's all there for you in the course. Now, as a supportive community, last week we also launched the Navigating the Financial Reset group, and we've got our first call coming up. If you're watching this on the day of release, it's coming up in the next 24 hours. We're doing our first call on the Wednesday, the 22nd. Let me just check I'm actually getting the date right. Wednesday the 22nd of March, and we'll be doing 2 calls a month where we're going to go through some of the strategies that we've alluded to today. Where we can get really into the technical elements, the tactical elements, have your questions answered, as well as explore some of the trends and analysis that we've also begun to talk about today, the big market cycles, as well as the more nuanced specifics around specific projects. So if you'd like to find out about either of these opportunities, you can go to weareelevate.org/reset, and it will break down both options that I've just shared with you. These are ways for you to continue the journey beyond the podcast. We're going to be here every week, every Tuesday, publishing new conversations like this, exploring these different nuances and angles. And hopefully what you'll appreciate about this type of conversation is we have this long form explorative discussion. And, there's lots of videos out there and resources out there, 3, 5, 10 minutes long, that kind of hit on very singular points, but you just don't get that bigger picture exploration of the holistic nature of what we're doing here. We've talked about market cycles, we've talked about history, we've talked about psychology, we've talked about many different levels of what's required to actually analyze this. So hopefully that's what sets the Uncharted Territory podcast apart.
Well, it's the dialogue, Dan, isn't it? That's so key. I've really been struck by that, how powerful, because I always said I need it, and it's helped me massively by talking to, having this conversation regularly. I got approached, sometimes I go to live events, and I did a conference, in Sussex last month, and people come up to me and say, will bring me their financial questions about but it's not what's so beautiful. I've realised it's not that I've got the binary answer, because they don't exist. Because it's not, I'm never going to say to someone, I think you should sell your house or do this. It's not, but just by, because they, know I'm looking at this area, they just knowing that they can have that discussion with me, it's pulling the info out themselves. That's what it is. That's the sovereign side of it. So the fact that we can have a dialogue and I can look at perspectives with you, whatever, it's not because I'm saying, yes, do this, do that. and they know that it's just we're having a conversation. It helps them to get clearer about their own feeling, because that's the really paralyzing thing. Also, is not being able to have that conversation, holistic conversation with people, around you, and so getting that going is huge. So often people walk away. It's not because I've said do anything, but I know that they've gone away and they go, no, that's really helped me get in tune with what I know I needed to do anyway. So we can always be the conduit for each other to pull it out of each other, and I think that's what's really beautiful about the process of keeping that dialogue going, which is what, as we know, that we've been so separated, Dan, out of our tribes, out of collective. That would always happen in a tribe, wouldn't it? You'd problems arise, but you'd have elders or people you respect, or to talk to, and peers. So that's what gets you the problems. And I always think, when I've got that, and this ties into the apocalyptic idea, when I've got that, I'm ready for anything. Because should we have, an EM, it all go, well, at least I've got amazing people to sit around and be curious about with, and share it, because the sharing is huge. So that's the ethos we bring to it, and obviously pulling all our experience and you think supported, but also pulling a lot of our contacts in. On my journey deep into this stuff, I've sifted through loads of people and found really good, mentors and different people in different areas who can add to this conversation. I know you have, Dan. More than anybody in this space have got such great view of the holistic, different people you can speak to. So we're also going to be putting that into the equation and giving people almost a fast track to be able to reach these people and have those kind of discussions with us and with them.
Yes, yeah, I think one of the key things for me about the latest program we've brought together, the support program, is it really is that. It's a support program and community. It's creating that basis of shared exploration, which is why we've called this podcast the Uncharted Territory Podcast, because it's reflective of the fact that we are in unknown times or uncertain times, but it's time for us to explore and have that adventurous approach to positively looking at the territory around us and going to make sense of what's happening. And the reason why we've called our course Navigating the Digital Assets and the program, the Navigating the Financial Reset, is that navigation. We're
going to navigate. We're going to navigate.
Boldly and courageously exploring, but not, not as, well, we are, indeed, we're all pioneers here. We're all trailblazing here, but that's the point. We're all in it together. We're all, so the idea is, let's create a space where we can have courageous conversations and share wisdom. And
it's part of decentralization, because you're decentralizing your expertise even, because I always talk about, it's important that the old world of, experts we don't know, third parties we don't know, is not healthy, because often they can be corrupt, or we just don't know them, and you get a better judge with people in your local circle you've dealt with. So in essence, that's what we're doing, Dan, is that, rather than, say you found a good, you listen to something or watched a video on YouTube or listen to podcasts like ours, and you've got some great info, but what's going to really decentralize it for you is if you were able to be in that conversation, rather than go, I've heard, say it's like about, trusts or asset protection or crypto, you like that, but you're going to get a much greater feel if you're able to have an actual dialogue and ask your questions. So that's what I really want to bring to you. I think that's really exciting.
Yes.
Is that you're not just secondhand getting, even if it's great info and really good people, you're then able, which is really important, to speak to, get your questions answered, get a feel. Because I always think, you know so much more when you've dealt with somebody. That's why I really encourage people to, when you're dealing with experts anywhere, get an expert that you actually resonate with and really feel, you do have to have a certain level of trust, but you feel that and you know it much more from interacting with somebody for 5 minutes than you do from a cold online thing for years. Anybody who's done, I didn't do much, but anybody who's done in internet dating will realize that you could be chatting and flirting on an app for months, and then you'll realize more in the first 5 minutes of meeting.
Yes,
you learn much, because you pick up that energy of who you want to work with, or you want to make love with as well. Even more importantly, you pick up so much more in that than you do just, even if it's an amazing video. So I always say, and that's part of like the discernment. I like people not to have heroes anymore, because be your own hero. But equally, somebody you really idolize you've never met, you don't really know what their energy is like, and it's, I think, bringing that into your circle. So working with people you can relate to and also have close contact with, and that's what's so supportive, and that is decentralization.
Absolutely, yeah, and it enables you to be part of the conversation. Not just a passive observer.
Exactly, not that whole dynamic of expert and layperson, or it's almost like the old world is doctor and patient, therapist and client, whereas the future world for me is about equal dialogues, bringing our different skills and coming as equals. So that's what excites me.
Yes, and that's the active part. It's active participation. It's going from knowledge and awareness to empowerment and into action. So if you'd like to find out more about the two programs we've outlined, again, just go to weareelevate.org/reset. And to close out here, on the point of being part of the conversation, we're going to be here every Tuesday releasing new conversations for you. We'd love to hear your feedback about the types of conversation we're having. So do write in the comments your thoughts, feelings, and reflections on what we've shared today. The whole nature of exploring these different subjects, if there's a specific subject or theme you'd like us to take on, to explore, to bring a nuanced conversation to, again, post that in the comments, come and share it in our community. Let us know what you'd like us to cover. And please do share this conversation with others. There's lots of conversations out there with the kind of, you can on YouTube and we joke about it, see like the big shock faces, like the alarmism around the markets. But if you're looking for nuanced, holistic conversations around these types of subjects, please do subscribe to the podcast. At the present, we're on YouTube, Apple and Spotify. Of course, we're going to be on all the decentralized platforms as well. We're just getting started and get those set up. And do share this conversation if you've got value. It's important that we bring more and more people into this type of conversation so that together we can explore this uncharted territory and we can navigate the financial reset. Sam, any closing words for you before we sign out for today?
No, I think you summed it up beautifully, Dan. I think it's absolutely perfect. Nuanced, holistic, big thinking, combined with practical, grounded steps. That's where the magic is for me.
Wonderful. Well, that's over and out from us on the Uncharted Territory. Look forward to seeing you on our next episode and very much look forward to seeing our audience soon. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.